A happy season is Christmas, a time of joy and goodwill to all people. A virgin was with child. God ordained her to conceive and be fruitful. Ah, behold, a miracle. She gave birth to a son in a cave. The name of the cave was the Cave of Bethlehem. His foster father gave him the name Jesus, the Christ, Alpha and Omega, festive season of prayer. All right, ladies and gentlemen, here again we are in beautiful West Virginia. It just thrills me every time we have an opportunity to come to one of my favorite states. And we're very privileged again to have with us one of our favorite archaeologists, Robert Pyle. Robert, it's good to have you with us.
Real pleasure being here.
And we're also blessed to have Arndt Haidt here, that's an author and has done much of the work on the beautiful magazine West Virginia plus other works, and it's real good to be here with you all today. And we're going to see something that is absolutely fascinating. The Irish Ogham, or at least we believe that's what it is, one of the longest in the United States, or Robert, would that cover Europe also, or we'll say the U.S.?
They claim that it's one of the largest scripts in the world of Ogham, Old Irish.
Right, and it has been translated by Dr. Barry Fell, of whom you are all well acquainted, and we're just going to go through it, and we're going to discuss it with you. And again, thank both of you very much for inviting us back to West Virginia.
Our pleasure. Now, this is one of the two rebuses that's found here at this Horse Creek petroglyph, and the rebus is composed of sometimes symbols, various groups of markings that may represent someone's name or a message that these early scribes have taken time to really carve accurately into the stone, because I can see that if they were hurrying, that it could change the meaning of the symbol, the meaning of the message. And it's just really fascinating to see that someone had taken this much time and left a message, I guess, for us. So, and then the other rebus, the hand rebus, it's a particular interest of mine because of the Dingus petroglyph down in Dingus, West Virginia. The hand rebus that's there. There's not been a lot of public release on the information at this Dingus site, but the hand rebus is very impressive there as it is here. And again, composing of the various marks that do resemble the Ogham strokes that's been carved into stones in Europe. And again, we're here in southern West Virginia. Here's these petroglyphs in southern West Virginia with this kind of similarity.
When did you first find out about this?
Found out about it from a phone call from Arnott Haidt. He called me and said that they were going down to this site and wanted to know if I could go along, and unfortunately I wasn't able to meet with them. So he and Ida Jane Gallagher came down and they photographed it and presented it to Dr. Fell and then in turn Mr. Haidt presented it in the state magazine along with my articles on the Wyoming County petroglyph. And so that was about in March of let's see, I was in 82, 83. We were both involved with it. And then I came down at a later date and viewed the markings and Also stopped at the Beard's Fork petroglyph over in Boone County, or Fayette County, with Mr. Hyde. In doing so, we had located a panel with some very unusual symbols on it also. So, yeah, just really quite a sort of done that ever since I've come to these sites. It's just that sort of just have to put your hand there, just press your hand there. It's just very exciting group of markings, and the representing like the right hand of God. It's really.
What's the earliest documentation on this?
Some of the earliest is they were looking at around 5 to 800 A.D. The Dingus petroglyph and the Wyoming County. I looked at the Wyoming County as the 5th to 6th century A.D. As the Dingus, I'm looking at 11 to 1200 A.D. And my dating base there is the Anchor Cross that's found there, which dates to about 900 A.D. that's been recorded in Europe. And I looked at that, and knowing that it must have been later.
How about for modern times? Are there stories of this being here for a while? Do the Indians have stories of this being here? I mean, can we document that it's older than like 100 years just by modern stories? Or
Yeah, in some of the county histories, they've documented that these were Amerindian is what they looked at. They had matter of fact, the late Dr. Edward McMichaels, who I studied under, and also is a good friend and colleague, was very impressed with these petroglyphs. He said that he had discussed it with some of his colleagues as to being possible tool sharpenings and so forth, and he said, "I'm not satisfied with that." And I always remembered him saying that. He said, "I am not satisfied with that." And we were looking at many pictograph sites throughout Monongalia County there in Morgantown. And he and I started documenting some of the different graffiti sites from the 1920s, 1940s to give a basis as to say we could determine some of the stone or the age of those markings, and looking at the type of stone they were carved in, and we just set up that early data base. And that's what I use too, is that I use a comparison of the markings in stone that have actual dates on them. Sometimes you'll notice in the 1920s, 1930s, when people were going out on outings, picnics, and gatherings, is for some reason their recreation was carving in the stone, and a lot of times you can date those early 20 sites because the 4 or the letter P would be backwards, and that's the way they carved them. For what reason, I don't know. I guess maybe they might have did it purposely, but I think it was just maybe confused or hurrying. Yeah. But the roundness of the stone too, I mean the markings, the way they're rounded, they're not V-shaped. They're not real sharply cut into the stone. The only sharply cut grooves within the petroglyph stones of any symbol was the Christian religious symbols. It's like, again, like the Wyoming County, is that those were the symbols that were to, I guess, outlast all of the other markings. If it's just like to say that this is important. It's just like the hand rebus. It is very much indented, but I just find that the roundness, the way the marks are grooved in the face of the stone, were grooved in a circular base manner in order to, I guess, minimize the speed of the erosional process, the flow of the water going over a rounded surface rather than being directed through a small V and increasing the speed of that water, which would probably cause severe erosion. Yeah.
Is there any astronomical astronomical alignment that goes along with this particular variety?
I don't think that anyone has field checked that, but it sure won't surprise me if whenever it is checked that they find that it is astronomically aligned, because using astronomical alignment was their way of being knowledgeable of the seasons of the year. And again, I think that that's why these particular sites were chosen. And of course, the Wyoming County petroglyph certainly proved to be true. I mean, that was deciphered by Dr. Barry Fell 2 months before it had ever been field checked, and I was there. And when that sun had risen there at that early morning, and a shadow formed on that cliff, and this has a similar group of markings and on a similar type face, and we have an eastern exposure here at this site, and it certainly, if someone wanted to stay here, that they could certainly spend the night here. And there's several other rock shelters within the area that has produced archaeological evidence in showing that people had lived here as early as 500 AD, 900 AD. Yeah.
Can you show us the stem lines on this thing?
This is a stem line here that has purposely been rubbed into the face of the stone as to be utilized as a stem line. As where you see there's two mineral ribs is what I would refer to them as. These are or lenses of iron ore, limonite lenses. And these limonite lenses appear to have been utilized, these natural iron ore lenses have been naturally utilized as a stem line, because you can see the marks above and below it. And some of the marks don't go all the way continue through. It's like this grouping here. Here's 1, 2, 3 vertical marks there that don't extend down. And again, where a stem line was needed, you can see where they have been purposely rubbed in for right here. Right here. Sort of have to get back just a little bit so I can, because of the shadowing. This one. But this is a natural fracture here. There are just a couple of marks here, but as to how they play a part in the rest of the message, I don't know. Again, it's really gratifying is to see that even people today haven't left their initials or any graffiti whatsoever. Is that I guess maybe we are making a breakthrough in having people to really appreciate these type of sites and be knowledgeable of them and the importance of them, that they do need to be preserved, they do need to be studied. Because this is for all, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, our thanks certainly go to Dr. Barry Fell for his work in assisting the folks here in West Virginia in understanding this petroglyph. And we want to give you his opinion, his translation. And it consists of 3 lines in the main, which is, again, I remind you, one of the largest Ogham writings in America, or as far as we know, even the world. It is in 3 lines with the one line at the top, 1 center, and 1 at the bottom. Now, as it reads, the center line, which we're going to call line 1, reads first, and then line 2, and then we'll read line 3, and then we'll go to 4 and 5, which will be to our extreme right here, your left. Okay, we take line 1, and here is your interpretation. The interpretation is, a happy season is Christmas, a time of joy and goodwill to all people. And then we go to line 2, which is your lower line, and it reads, a virgin was with child. God ordained her to conceive and be fruitful. Ah, behold, a miracle. And then we go to the top for line 3, and the interpretation is, she gave birth to a son in a cave. The name of the cave was the Cave of Bethlehem. His foster father gave him the name Jesus, the Christ, Alpha and Omega, festive season of prayer. And we'll give you a close-up of Christos and many of the markings which will be quite familiar to you. I think it's astounding that dating back to 600 and 700 AD, there were travelers here from Ireland. And as was forementioned, I want to show you some of the scenery before we leave here. We're by the most beautiful stream, and then a clearing whereby anyone that has any agriculture experience could provide for several people, plus there is shelter in the area. And how fantastic that people migrating throughout this world with the intelligence, as Mr. Powell had stated, sandstone is it's a soft material overall in relationship to, say, granite. And to carve these deep lines, this ogham, would have taken a great deal of time, a great deal of effort. They were proud, no doubt, of the Christian symbols that are entailed within this, carrying that story on forward, knowing in themselves what a miracle it truly was. Now, I want to go to the rebus. I hope that this shows up on camera as well as it does on this stone. For to have carved even this palm and the fingers, but the palm is recessed. That took a great deal of time, and to have it even the appearance of a palm, we have that rebus. And now you got to understand that a rebus such as this you can find in many places, but especially in Ireland. And the translation by Dr. Fell is, the right hand of God is a shield. And of course this is a prayer. And I'm sure that when people traveled in this area, there were dangers. I have no doubt about that. And I'm sure that to know that the right hand of God is a shield to a man who believes, certainly that is important. And we just thank these folks that have made it possible for us to come to this location and share these writings with you. Okay, and just past, or just away from the rebus we were just looking at, here we have another rebus. And it is a hand. And this rebus, here's your wrist coming up into the hand. The translation of this, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, one God. So you can see, even though it was 600 to 800 AD, that certainly we had believers in this area. Believers, because the Christian symbols document that fact. How fascinating it is. Time to our Father means really nothing. For, in fact, is it not written that with Him, one day is as 1,000 years with man? And that if, as Christian believers do, that God does direct people, well, certainly we see His hand in leaving those symbols for those that might say, well, I really wonder. Well, latecomer on this old planet, there have been believers here for a long time, and they show their talents for having taken the time to leave this message, to share their faith in a very dangerous place, that they were those believers. According to the translation, how we thank those that are not afraid to step forward and share their skills in archaeology as well as other things to document the ages, the type of stone that actually gives credence to the very ogham plate itself. And we hope you've enjoyed this. The Ogham Writings of Boone County, West Virginia. You know what? You were there.
It's always exciting as we go out into the countrysides to find these various locations where many of you help us. If you have a back 40 and find a stone that has markings on it, we enjoy knowing about it. That's one thing that makes our documentary so successful. But having returned from West Virginia again, what an exciting area, and how rich it is, as you're going to find this. The Horse Creek petroglyph is the largest Ogham writing in the world, actually. I know you're going to enjoy it, but I want to talk to you about alphabets just a little bit, and I'm going to be going into more detail just a little later on. Most of our knowledge of Ogham comes from a Dublin manuscript known as the Ogham Tract, composed by an unidentified monk in the 14th century. It describes some 94 varieties of Ogham and other alphabets known to this particular scribe. But the writer indicates that he knew of some 150 varieties of ancient Irish alphabets. This is a portion of one of the folio charts in the Ogham Tract. Now, archaeological research shows that Ogham was widely used in many parts of the ancient world. It also occurs on Celtic coins issued in Gaul in the 2nd century before Christ, some hundreds of years before the earliest known Irish Ogham inscriptions. The script related the first Ogham message ever written as the work of a magician named Ogmius, and that it was a warning sent to Lugh informing him of a plot to abduct his wife. Okay, let's talk about alphabets just a moment. Alphabets are not a language. Alphabets simply create sound, such as one of the prime examples is that we found in the Cherokee alphabet, which is called, rather than an alphabet, a syllabary, meaning that syllables were sounded by one letter. But an alphabet, again, not being a language, but being a group of letterings, whichever language you would be speaking, the letters form the sound from the mouth. A group of letters can form a symbol, or a syllable rather, or a word. And you're going to find that the basic Ogham, which is, we're now looking at straight line Ogham, which is very easy, would do our father that it was all this simple, because there are various types of Ogham that are still the same principle, and the alphabet is read in this way. You will note the stem line, and unless it is corner edge Ogham or something of that nature, you will always have this stem line, whether it be natural in a rock or chiseled in the rock. And the stem line, as to how marks go above, below, or on, determine the letter or the sound of the letter. Let's start with the A. And here, crossing the stem line, you see a very short stroke. Now let's take the B. B is the longer stroke below the stem line. Now, when you're reading Ogham, there is no different. When you see those two marks, that's A and B, as though you would be sounding it in English. You would pronounce it in English, Abe. And, of course, in other languages, it could mean other things. But the sound Abe, it would be A-B in English. Now, how about the letter C? You'll note that there are 4 longer strokes above, I repeat, above the stem line. D, you have 2 longer strokes above the stem line. And when you find these writings, you will always have a little break between. And vowels were not usually used. They had to be inserted. But the language in some of the ancient languages, of course, knowing the language, those vowels fall in place. Look at the E. 4, let's call these short strokes abreast of or on the stem line itself. And then we have F, which is 3 of the longer strokes below, repeat, below the stem line. G, now here for the first time, we see 2 in the alphabet, 2 long strokes across the stem line. It means the same thing as our letter G. How about the H? 1 long line above the stem line, you've got the letter H. And I, being 5 short strokes on the stem line, L, 2 long strokes below, M, 1 long line across the stem line, and N, of course, 3. Now, there you have an example of the alphabet. And when we see this alphabet, there are many things. You'll notice on the stem line below, you will see EA or IA is the letter. In English, we might call that an X. Okay, and these various letters, vowels will appear in letters in the and along with the alphabet. And how interesting it is. Remember again, an alphabet is not a language. An alphabet is simply a way that an individual makes sound, and it is according to the language you speak. In other words, all these translations, you will note, could very easily have been written in English. Let me correct myself, an English alphabet. But no, the English alphabet was not used at this time. The Ogham alphabet was used. So I hope you find that of interest, and you can see how exciting it is when you begin to expand and deal with alphabets of whatever type. How exciting. And it is one reason that we are so thankful for the men such as Dr. Barry Fell, who have years of experience in dealing with various alphabets and languages. Now, let's go to the Ogham text on the Horse Creek petroglyph. And now that you understand the Ogham alphabet a little better, let's take a closer look at the Horse Creek petroglyph. The horizontal lines, 1, 2, and 3, you will note that they are numbered there to the left on your screen. They're near between the 2 rebuses there and the lines, horizontal lines. They comprise the Old Irish text, a short biblical abstract of the 2nd chapter of Luke. You might have thought the way in which the scribe wrote the 3 lines, or how Dr. Fell would have us read them, is wrong. But the Old Norse 3-line rock inscriptions are read exactly this way. Middle line first, that being your line 1, next the bottom line, that being your line 2, and then the top being line 3. It would seem that the oldest part of the inscription is the upper right section, which is Chi Rho. Alpha and Omega are your Christ signs. That is always a Christian symbol. At some later date, a scribe decided to cut a nativity text on the rock in such a manner that the culminating event, the actual naming of the Christ child, would be cited at the point when his text reached the pre-existing sacred signs for the name of Christ. He succeeded, but at a cost of overcrowding his text in the final section, as you have illustrated there. The West Virginia Ogham text are the longest Ogham inscriptions recorded from anywhere in the world. They exhibit the grammar and vocabulary of Old Irish in a manner previously unknown in such early rock-cut inscriptions in any Celtic language. Now, let's look at the Ogham text line by line. The top line is the Ogham script of the petroglyph. The second line is the translation of the script. The third line is the Ogham presented in a straight line format with the vowels inserted. The fourth line is the Old Irish reading of the script, and the fifth line is the English translation. So here, when we read then the petroglyph, line 1, we see a happy season is Christmas, a time of joy and goodwill to all people. Isn't that precious? I think it's just fascinating. Okay? And we see in this respect, and we'll go right on here if we may. Line 2 being the bottom line on the overall petroglyph, and it reads, I want you to listen to the beauty of this. Don't you know Dr. Fell was excited as he translated this? A virgin was with child. God ordained her to conceive and be fruitful. Ah, behold, a miracle. The writer himself, seeing the majesty and the influence of the Holy Spirit in this line 2, which is the bottom line, that he would see the very conception in the fact that it was ordained by God himself through the Holy Spirit, and the writer declaring, oh, a miracle. And then we'll go to the final line, line 3, and I think it's precious because it would seem that one of the reasons perhaps that this method would be used is that was perhaps most sacred, could be help for the top, such as the top rock of a mountain was always the place where the name Yahweh was written. And here we have that fact, which certainly should have top billing. She gave birth to a son in a cave. The name of the cave was the Cave of Bethlehem. His foster father, don't you like that description? Foster father, meaning Joseph, of course, gave him the name Jesus, the Christ, Alpha and Omega, festive season of prayer. Certainly it should have held that top line. Longest Ogham petroglyph known in the world. And what a beautiful place that it was found in as we visited the Horse Creek area where this particular place is located. May our Father always protect this one, and may it never be public to the point that it could be desecrated. Okay, let's go to the pious symbols, or the rebus, if we may. The two pious symbols, or rebus symbols, used at the Horse Creek petroglyph were used by the early Christian church and is the dextera Dei, or right hand of God. Here you see an example carved on a 10th century Irish cross. This was used quite a bit. And of course the rebus reads, right hand of our Father, the right hand of God. And let me ask you a question. Who sits at the right hand of God? Christ, of course. So you see the beauty in that consists of the right hand of God, which is Christ himself. In Dr. Barry Feld's book, Saga America, attention is drawn to the occurrence of this symbol at American archaeological sites. He suggests that it implies contacts with Europe around the 10th century, when the symbol was a popular feature in coinage designs. Whether the West Virginian examples should be dated to the 6th or the 10th century AD is at present uncertain, but this presence supports the idea of continuing Irish contacts over a period of several centuries in the latter part of the first millennium AD. Now, let's take a look here, if we may, a little closer at the symbols and how they are deciphered. When the Ogham strokes are arranged to suggest a picture, such as the hand, of course, the result is what is called a rebus. It is a method used by the scribe to help the reader to understand his inscription. For the hand rebus, next to the Ogham text, we note the hand in the lower part of the inscription. In Celtic languages, the verb stands first in the sentence and is followed by the subject. So we disregard the first few strokes to the left and look at the word hand, lamb in Old Irish, L-A-M. As expected, the letters L-M are there. They are preceded by 3 uppercase strokes, note that, which is the letter T. And when used at the beginning of a sentence as a verb is preceded ta or te, and is the Old Irish word is, I-S as in English. Then we have the L and M for the word hand, and then D and S or D-E-S in Old Irish for right. Next to the D and I-A or die, which is Old Irish for God, and next is D-I-O-N or Dian, which is shield in Old Irish. The last letter is L, which Dr. Fell translates as E-L-E, and in Old Irish is, quote, a prayer, unquote. So in the Old Irish way of reading, you get, is the right, is the hand right of God a shield, a prayer? Or in modern English, the right hand of God is a shield, a prayer. How interesting, how fascinating that this rebus would be placed there. And although Ogham is so easy, look at the complexity of this rebus. In other words, compared to just a straight scribed line. However, it still reads exactly the same if you take your time. The other hand rebus is a different type of rebus. Here, all the Ogham strokes are incorporated into the hand. And there are 3 transverse stem lines crossing the strokes. Repeat, 3 transverse stem lines crossing the strokes. This warns us that the Ogham strokes are to be read separately for each of the stem lines, assuming therefore different alphabet values according to whether they stand above or below or across any given stem line. The rebus is a monogram in which various letters have been superimposed. In the eyes of the layman, it is just a group of lines on a rock, but in the eyes of a linguist such as Dr. Fell, these lines become a most beautiful Christian statement from the past. The resulting decipherment is a sequence of Old Irish words: atar, mac, sabarad, nub, on, dia, which being fully translated is to say the beautiful words Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, one God. I repeat, being translated Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, one God. And upon checking early Christian literatures, you find that the mystical meaning of the dexterida is that the hand symbolizes the unified Trinity. The closed fist represents God the Father, the fingers, God the Son, and the palm, the Holy Spirit. This petroglyph, which is below the right hand of God rebus is not in Ogham, but is in a Libyan text. I want to repeat that again. The petroglyph which is below the right hand of God rebus is not in Ogham, but is in a Libyan text. It is a second witness to the two hand rebus writings and a fine example of what epigraphers best like to find: bilingual text that say the same thing in two languages, the one confirming the other. The Libyan letters translated as Ya min Elihai, meaning, wouldn't you know, meaning the right hand of God. How exciting it is in our travels as we traverse these lands, as just returning from Texas, that we find the dual alphabets, the same word, water, in more languages than one. I know you're going to enjoy this largest of all petroglyphs in Ogham, and how beautiful the message is, that it has to do with the birth and the gift that our Father gave His children, who would be the right hand of God, for He sits at the right hand of our Father, and how we thank those that took part and assisted in making this possible for you. The fact that this one that must be protected, yet you are there.
Okay, yeah.
Well, Bob, you know, in 1983 we published these interesting stories on these petroglyphs. It really caused worldwide interest, especially since they suggest they're pre-Columbian and certainly Irish in origin. Since I published this, what else have you done in this, or what else have been discovered?
Well, it has been a long time, but it's been a very exciting time, and as I don't know if you remember, we discussed if there was any petroglyphs to be found anywhere in the state, that we were looking at Moundsville because of the Great Grave Creek tablet that was found there. And I'd been notified of 14 new petroglyphs there in Moundsville, and they have very similar markings. And one of the stones that I really liked, because of the type of symbol that was on the surface of the stone, was very identical to that site there at Beard's Fork. Do you remember us going to Beard's Fork? It was quite a job in locating it, but it was really fascinating to see that here again the same type symbol was found at more than one archaeological site, and indicating that there must have been some kind of communication. And I just felt that Moundsville, Marshall County, would be the major county in the state of West Virginia to produce a variety or major petroglyphs. And so, by golly, here just within the last 2 years, 14 have surfaced, and then another one was on the Robert Roche property. There was another petroglyph found there. It was a small 10-inch in diameter tablet-like type form of an artifact with these different markings on it. And the markings, they all had a stem line, just as you can see, like the markings here. And of course, you remember the one that the Wyoming County is, all the stem lines that are there, and all the marks and the groupings of marks are below and above and across a stem line. It's just really been fascinating, and being able to see that there has been a lot of interest stimulated through the petroglyph releases, and especially the West Virginia State Magazine and your dedication to it, because that's what's really kept it alive for a lot of people. And because I still get a lot of correspondence from not only in the state but from all over the country, and wanting to know more about the West Virginia petroglyphs, what's going on.
Well, you know, Bob, that's interesting, because a lot of people call me too, but the great thing is I have your telephone number. I just refer them to you.
Well, that's
so
great.
I don't claim to be an expert. So.
Well, I don't claim to be the expert, but I do enjoy working with them, and I have had some experience, and I look at that experience and apply it to the actual records at these ancient sites. And again, I am looking at the archaeology, because I think that the archaeology is extremely important, of course, but I think one of the things that's even more important than just the archaeology, I think it's the understanding of these markings. And I think that time will give us that answer as to how these marks were really intended. And again, one of the things that really fascinates me is the Christian religious symbols that are found at these sites, and that
yeah, just like the rebus, Bob, in the hand. It's just
yeah, the rebus.
So unique.
It is, and the piety symbols that at any Amerindian site I've not seen anything like that. And it's also fascinating is that there's no, I guess you could say, Amerindum graffiti at these sites. In other words, these early people that were here about the same time and earlier respected these markings. I guess maybe they looked at them as being very powerful, and because
sacred and
yeah, being sacred, and it was something definitely that they weren't familiar with and hadn't seen on many of the stones that they've viewed throughout the state, because you know how it is in West Virginia as far as our sandstone formations go, is you can find sandstone most anywhere, but
well,
to
Bob,
have
do
them.
you suppose that the oral tradition or story of this was passed down from generation, or at least for a while, that may have kept these in a sacred type of site?
I think that the scribe or scribes, whomever they were, really took this into account as to, because of the different types of symbols that are found at these petroglyph sites, leaving the message in more than one language. Knowing that this is the way it would be with any of our missionaries, as many of them are very knowledgeable in many different languages. And I thought, boy, what would really make one's mission meaningful is to have a message left in many different languages, because who was to know what group would follow through? And they were very learned in that early time period, the hermit priests. And again, it's exciting every time I come to one of the petroglyph sites and try to see, is there anything that I've overlooked?
Well, it seems kind of obvious to me, Bob, that over the years that maybe part of this is buried. I wonder what's under the ground.
Well, looking at the location here, and you're along a stream, and this stream, I'm sure, floods relatively frequent, and this huge cliff of cross-bedded sandstone, I'm sure that there's probably many other inscriptions. Matter of fact, when we were just walking out the pathway there, and I'd noticed one of the 3-line track figures that I hadn't noticed before, and it was just blaring out at me as to say, stop here for a minute. And so I just know that this area, as all the petroglyphs, they really do need to be researched even further, and taking that data and letting many linguists have an opportunity to look at it, to evaluate it, and to compare it to the record that's in Ireland. That's what I would think. That,
well, are there many that look like this in Ireland, Bob?
Yes, there's quite a few in Ireland, and they're in the records in Dublin. They have recorded, they have like about 94 to 96 varieties of ogham. Some of the linguists, Dr. Fell included, is that they indicate that they even have recognized as much as even 150 varieties of ogham. And again, here at this petroglyph, it's really exciting, is that the scribe or scribes who applied these markings on this stone had to have been very knowledgeable of the properties of stone, because I do not see any fracturing that would occur if someone was just haphazardly applying marks. And again, it tells me that these people were very knowledgeable of the properties of stone, and I've said that before about the Wyoming County petroglyph, and again here at the Horse Creek, and up at Beard's Fork where you and I were, and many other sites. And it's again, I see this discipline used by these scribes.
Bob, one thing that's interesting to me, I think on 4 of the sites that we've done, they're all in an overhang, and there's a stream in front and a field where people could be gathered if a scribe were orally telling a tradition. Do you find that interesting, or of any significance?
and I think that it's a great significance, because you can only house so many people under the actual overhang itself, and what better way in discussing the petroglyph is to have a nice open area. And from what I've read and what I've seen on television, that these petroglyphs are very similar to areas in Ireland, and maybe that's one of the things that directed them to this particular site, is because it may have reminded them of a home area. Another thing is that it's a sun exposure, and I think the astronomical alignment was very important to these people. And just remembering back when we were first involved with each other in the petroglyphs, that I remember the aerial infrared that you had sent me, we had done, or that you had done here, and showed the village site, and then the rock shelter that had been occupied. Tony Shields and I had been in this area and was looking at, again, the archaeological record. I was interested in knowing who did live here and what time were they here, and I can base that on I can determine that through the archaeological data. And again, it's just very impressive in seeing. I mean, this is really artwork. It's really been very meaningful. It's again located right here on this river bank, and I think what's kept the markings so well preserved and in other words, why they're so sharp, is because of the silting, the alluvium that's deposited in against the face of this. And back to your question, I would say that just from the pathway here and seeing that one mark back here, that there probably are many, many more markings. Maybe there's more to the message than this.
Well, you know, Bob was so interested in that gold crucifix that we found under a rock shelter. You know, it'd be certainly interesting in an excavation here to see what artifacts might substantiate this. You didn't bring your shovel, did you?
No, I'm afraid it would take a little it would take a little longer than just an overnight camp excavation, but
I think this is about the first time I haven't seen you with a shovel or a screen. And
well, I was told they were going to let me talk and not work. So, but I'm ready to work, and especially when it involves the petroglyphs, not only just of West Virginia, but I'm interested in many of the other surrounding states as well. And I know over in Kentucky, Virginia, Tennessee, that there are many other petroglyphs that do have similarities. And again, I'm looking at one thing specific, and that is the Christian religious symbols that are on record in Europe that have been applied to the stones in West Virginia. And that's what I want to see, because I think there's a special message there with those symbols themselves.
This gives you an example. We've always, when you come into a site, if you are very watchful, you can even locate other writings, and who knows, perhaps someday that we'll be able to do a dig to see even what's below. But here we have, and it has not been translated, what appears to be Ogham with a stem line, and what we would call out in the desert even turkey tracks, a couple of them here. And here again that Christian symbol, the cross, and a possible Roth. But that's how it all happens. Some of you even have markings that you have seen and you think insignificant. Always take a picture of them if you would, and send that to us. Allow us to have a look at it and study it and research it. If we don't know, perhaps we can find somebody that does. But history belongs to everyone, and certainly as people migrate, they leave signs, trail marks. As we've always said, the rocks do speak. And this is an example, and let us encourage you to always share this sort of thing with us. For certainly, it's all part of a puzzle, and that puzzle is called history.
Okay. This is my wife, Diane. This is my friend, Brenda Cantus, and my other friend, Tom Morose, from Morgantown. And Brenda Cantus is the friend that came up with the title of my book, All That Remains. And Tom Morose has been my geology advisor, and has helped me document a lot of information, archaeological, historically. And again, Brenda has also has organized my files, and has really been a supporter in my work, and I appreciate them all very much. Thank you.
All right. Say hello to the world, guys.
Hi.